Did you get a notification?
Yes. So this meeting is
Cool,
recording.
cool, cool. Well, I will go ahead and get us started as George is settling in. First of all, I'm Latanya or LT. I'm currently a director of university partnerships for a company called Re-Up Education, and also adjunct part-time whatever. What are we calling me, Pedro?
We're
Adjunct
calling you,
faculty?
yes, but we're calling you an amazing, dope
Nah.
faculty member at Santa Clara University. That's
None of that, none of that. However, I'm very proud to be teaching in the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling at Santa Clara University. Hey, shout out Chrissy. Um, however, what brings us here today is the series I started about a year ago, First Gen Legacy series, in which we're really trying to reframe this idea of legacy for first gens. Typically, when we think about legacy, refers to folks who've had long histories with something. And I wanted to start a conversation about the legacies that first generation college students and professionals leave on their campuses and organizations and what have you. So the kickoff conversation actually, again, was a little more than a year ago with why am I blanking right now? Um, Craig, Craig, who's the father. Wait, why am I totally blanking? Um, Carolina Panthers quarterback, his father,
Bryce Young.
Bryce. Thank you. Well, I spoke with not Bryce Young, but his dad, Craig Young, who's a former student of mine and who was a first gen to college, and we talked about his influence on Bryce. And then the second part of the series was actually a conversation with my own mother, who also was a proud first gen. So we talked about what her trajectory was like. What brings us here today, though, was a conversation I had with my kids. And
Good
if you
thing.
haven't had a chance, here, I'll put a link in the chat for anyone who hasn't had a chance to listen to it. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. So how did this come about? Why was I talking to my own kids? Well, so number one, I at one point was a faculty in residence at UCLA, and I lived on the campus for 5 years. And during that period, my daughter was age 3, my son was age 7. So imagine that for 5 years, literally living on the UCLA campus and growing up living in an apartment. And I mean, like the researcher in me was just fascinated by this. Like, first of all, think about the low, low, low percentage of young people who have that opportunity to literally live on a college campus. And I often wondered how that experience impacted them. So finally, they are now 20. Okay, hold on, aunties and uncles, but 22 and 26 years old. Woo! And one of them has already completed college and one is near completion. So I really wanted to talk to them about what that experience was like. So that's what the video was. So as a researcher, I really didn't, when I interviewed them, I didn't really intervene in their conversation. I wasn't adding my own analysis of the situation. I tried for the most part to really be neutral, but trust me, I had questions and thoughts. Um, so a number of people watched the video and started texting me about it. And I was like, yo, we really should have a good conversation, analysis of it. So I'm gonna toss this over to Pedro in just a second, but to um honestly, this is an open conversation, but to set it up first, for, number one, I asked George Turner to come and be here today. George literally, uh, George will always be known as Jabari's first babysitter. Jabari was 2, maybe 2,
Yes.
something like that. It was ridiculous. Yeah, that was 99. Jay was born in 97, so
Yep.
Jabari was 2 years old. So he's Uncle George. They literally have George has been in their whole life. They don't even know life without George. And so I wanted George to come and offer his take. And then Pedro, like you, I think Zoe was actually about 3. when
Mm.
there's a picture of all of us in like little bitty Zoe in her pink and sparkle days. And so and some of you as well have known my kids for a really long time. So thank you all for being chosen family. I'm going to send this over to Pedro now. So we really wanted this to be a kind of a relaxed conversation. Like I said, initially it'll be just me, me, George, and Pedro talking just to set things up. But everyone, please chime in. And without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to my hermano Pedro Nava, who was a student researcher, a graduate mentor at UCLA during this time period. So that I've known Pedro for a really long time as well. All right, Pete, over to
All
you.
right. Yeah. Well, thank you, LT, just for the just the warm introduction and just seeing all the folks on the call. I think really I mean, there's a flood of memories, right? And so, I'm super interested in this convo myself. Just one being first gen, two being a parent, three just hearing, right? I think just the experiences of your children, both Zoe and Jabari. And I think for me, I think it's been eye opening in some ways, and also in others. And I'll share just a little bit about myself. Presently, I'm a faculty member at Santa Clara University. I'm an associate professor there, and I direct the educational leadership program along with just the EDD and social justice leadership. And uh, just to just reiterate a couple of points, right? And then I'll pass it on to George. But I think a couple of, or pass it back to you, LT. But I think a couple of things that came up to me and just listening to the conversation is I know from a first gen standpoint for me, right, it's always like, well, we're not second gen, or we're not third gen, or we're not fourth gen, right? And so part of that perspective is always the assumption, right, that there's kind of like an infinite amount of experience that comes with it, right? And I think for me, where it really hit was hearing about their application, like the college going process, right? So in some ways, living on campus, hearing about their experiences at UCLA was eye opening. Hearing the names of folks on this call and intertwined in there, I think said a lot in terms of just the notion of chosen family, the warmness, the overall kind of just it sounded to me like good memories about UCLA, but also just elements of like folks questioning, right, whether they even lived on campus, right, whether it was ill intent or not. And that wasn't the point. The point was like, like it's kind of weird, right, in some way, but it's also cool that you live on campus, but also like, nah, you got to be kidding. You don't live on campus. You mean Westwood, right? And then the piece of it for me is like, when we start thinking about the hidden curriculum or notions of cultural capital. In fact, we were talking about this this past week in my doctoral seminar, and there's this kind of assumption, right, that it just kind of spills over, right? Like, and there's this abundance, right? And in the conversation, one of the key pieces that came to me was that like there was a lot about the application process that they were able to glean and gain support from you and Rob, right, LT? But there's still a lot of other things, right? That they were familiar with UCLA. That's what they were most familiar with, not like with higher ed in general, right? Even having gone to a camp or two, there's still a lot of unanswered questions that they didn't have. And while maybe the app process might have been easier to be able to kind of lean on you for some of that, like there's a bunch of other like institutional type for Zoe in particular, going to an art school that was totally like unfamiliar, right? Like, and even Jabari, right? Like Jabari was more like, it seemed like he was kind of having UCLA as a kind of centerpiece, right? It was kind of like, look, I felt like I needed something else, something different, right? And to me, it was powerful just to see, as a father of a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and now a 5-year-old, right? Like, and also similarly, like my kids initially lived at my first institution at Mills College with us on campus, right? Like it was cool in terms of getting to meet folks and know folks, but and even going to a children's school there on campus, right? Like, it made me wonder, like, how much does this actually extend, right? Like, and I'm saying it from the perspective of like, well, we might be middle class in some ways, which is kind of like a weird trajectory. Like, it's also like, and I'll finish with this point. We're also in a generation where, college costs a lot more than it did when we were there, and then even the prior generation, right? the amount of loans, the heightened kind of competition to get in, I think is even more so than prior generations. So I'll stop there, but I'll just simply say that it was an eye-opening kind of experience to on the one hand hear the love and the praise and the fact that they and I know you weren't trying to push for this, but the fact that hearing Jabari like shout you out, LT, like there were some internal tears coming out in my heart, just being like, yo, like in terms of an inspiring figure, right? Aside from other folks that they obviously mentioned, but you in particular, I think was dope, knowing that they could turn to you for that.
As we transition in for George's overall comments, George, who I know watched this video several times, one of the things I will say, Pedro, thanks for like there's so many things we could like, so many strings to pull there, but the thing about my kids, we're not the Huxtables, right? They're not the Huxtables, and the reason why I say that is the
Mm-hmm.
Huxtables actually were
Mm-hmm.
multi-generational college going. So my kids are second gen, right? They have more in common with probably not in terms of like wealth, but the Banks family and the Fresh Prince, right? Because the Uncle Phil and Aunt Viv were first gen, their
Mm-hmm.
kids were second gen. Or another analogy might be the Johnson family on Blackish, right? Rainbow and Andre were first gen, and their kids became second gen. So not Huxtable's level yet,
Mm-hmm.
but so it's really interesting to think about all these different iterations. George, why did you watch this video so many times, and what is your overall takeaway?
So the video, I hope everybody can hear me because as soon as I touch any sort of technology, it falls apart. But I'll say that as a preliminary, and also moment of silence. This is the 8 year anniversary of our esteemed artist Prince's passing. So
Moment
I've
of
been
silence.
really moment of silence. I've been listening to Purple Rain and Take Me With You All Day. Well, some of my favorites. But the reason why I watch this video so many times is because there are so many strings to pull, and it is so deep what's happening here. The growth of these children. I mean, these are amongst the literally the first children that I watched grow because I'm the baby of my family. And so, I go to UCLA and I'm babysitting a 2 year old and I, never thought that that would be my experience, but I had a great time with him. And to see that 2 year old be a grown man is something that it surprises me. It reminds me of a story. My mom, so the Mileses come to my house, and I come to their house regularly, and our families know each other. And one day, Zoe and Jabari were over, and my mom was over, and my mom saw Jabari on the couch, and then she goes in and tells me, she's like, I think Jabari ran away. And I don't know how to tell his parents that, like, their teenage son has run away in Inglewood. And I said, what are you talking about? Jabari's on the couch. My mom says, no, that's a grown man on the couch. Jabari's a teenager. I'm like, no, that is quite literally the little boy you saw. He's not a little boy anymore. So I've watched these kids grow up. Also, the reason why I'm fascinated is because I'm having a sort of similar experience raising my own children. I have three black boys myself, and I am married to somebody who is not even a second. She's like a third or fourth gen sort of college student. I mean, and so being able to sort of relate to my kids is something that I'm always a little concerned with, and something that I always check in with the missus about, because I had a very, very first gen experience. Like first kid to go to college, to successfully graduate from college, and being able to negotiate all of the sort of practical, but also sort of the emotional feelings of being a first gen. That sort of feeling of doubt, coming from a small pond to a big pond and being able to say you're still successful were things that I struggle with. And, the level of confidence that my wife has in education, because her parents and grandparents went to college, is very sort of matter of fact that I never had. Like, college is still a big deal to me. But you know, like watching Zoe and Jabari talk about it, it was kind of like very matter of fact. Like, no, college is not. College is where I was raised. In the same way that I rep like Inglewood, they're like, yeah, like no, yeah, I was born and raised in Westwood. Like I was born and raised on UCLA's campus. And to me, like being born and raised in Los Angeles, I still remember the experience of getting on the 405 freeway and heading north and seeing like the quality of the cars change and like the differences in like the first Lamborghini I saw was on my way to UCLA's campus. There were no Lamborghinis in Inglewood. You know, I still remember the experience of like getting off on Westwood Boulevard or Sunset and being like, this is like superstar stuff. Like I remember it being like wild and amazing. And so it's interesting to see these adults who were born and raised there, and they're like, nah, that's just kind of normal. You know, that's just it's literally no big deal to them. And so there is a level of privilege that you know that is worthy of being investigated, but like the sort of it's not just kind of privilege, it's more like a certain level of like extreme confidence that like, you know, it was like for me, I always believed I was going to go to college and graduate, but I didn't know nobody who had actually done it. So it was like, yeah, you know, it was the equivalent of like I'm gonna be in the NBA. As a matter of fact, I knew NBA players. I really didn't know a whole bunch of college students, right? So like to be around people, young Black folks whose mom also has a first gen experience, and just kind of have that sort of like, yeah, like, yeah, who doesn't go to college? Everybody I know goes to college. That's what we do. You know, you know, it's like, yeah, you know, yeah, like I'm always at a presentation on a college campus. Someone is always doing research. Someone is always publishing books. Some and that's just I'm still excited about those things, and that is literally their lived experience. And so I am trying to get accustomed to that, even with my own kids. You know, their kid. You know, my kids have two parents with postgraduate degrees, and I'm like, my dad was a truck driver who was barely literate, and my mom was his secretary. Um, my kids are my mom's a therapist, and my dad's a lawyer running for judge. They just have very different experiences. They just have very different experiences. So you know, and then so that's one part of it. And I could go on because time is also a trippy thing for me. And we can go on to that next part,
Okay.
but like you know, 99 doesn't seem that long ago for me, but
Hmm.
you know, it clearly was because they're whole adults who were born in 97. That's crazy. It's crazy to me.
Yep.
It's crazy time.
Well, Pedro, where do you want us to begin? Was there a certain topic you wanted to start with?
I mean, I think that there's that to George's point, right? There's so many different strings, LT. I think that um, you know, let's start where it goes, LT. I mean, I think um, you know, the other piece I think for me that was I think particularly powerful was just hearing about them kind of their own navigational experiences. One, getting into college, but also that experience, right? And even you know just giving it a go, right? And being proud of oneself, regardless of the experience, right? And recognizing that that's a door that is there for whenever, right? And so it's hearing Zoe's, I mean Jabari's basketball hoop. Endeavors as well, right? And so thinking about the different tools that they've acquired in the process, I think has also been, you know, just a powerful kind of experience. So any of those strands, LT, I think would be great because I think we're going to kind of loop around anyhow. So
Well, why don't we open it up for folks who are here? What do they want to talk about? Anything that stood out to you from the video? Again,
I'll go again.
huh?
I said I can go again.
Well, hold on a second.
I, I
Go
think
ahead. What up, E?
what stood out to me was the comment that Zoe made about when she did the summer program, I think at UCLA, she had done like a program. And then when it came time to go to art school, she was like, oh, I knew where I didn't want to live. Like I didn't want to be in a dorm room. I wanted a suite or something, or like it was great because like I had my own bathroom and I already knew that like I had done the other thing, like where I had to share a bathroom and I didn't want, and I was like, wow, like it was amazing to me that she already had that knowledge going in. That most students don't have. I mean, unless they've really experienced the campus in that way.
Thank you for that. Let me add a little bit more color to this as well, just so y'all know. She only referenced a UCLA summer program. She had done UCLA, Otis College, SAIC, three co three pre-college programs before she went off to college. And not only that, she also knew the difference between a BA and a BFA at 16.
And I still don't know the difference right now as we speak.
P, I know you said, well, truthfully, they both dropped a few mics, but P, I know at the beginning of this you mentioned some comments that Zoe made. Was there something in particular that you want to share?
There was I think it was related to the earlier comment that I made in regards to feeling prepared for the app process, but not prepared for art school, like that experience, right? And I might be misquoting a little bit, but that I think for me was kind of like, wow, like I just sat back and it was just like, you know, we all, there isn't a universal kind of higher ed experience, right? I think in some ways, right? There's different college types. The fact of like, I know she mentioned that it wasn't that big of a deal necessarily moving away, right? I think being at a different state is the way she framed it, right? But now all of a sudden you're at an art school and then getting, if I'm not misquoting, exhausted, right, from like from those elements, right? And I know in my mind when I think it's like, well, your mom's a PhD in English, right, in terms of writing essays, right? But also like, how do we value and honor people's individuality, right? And I think that's beautiful and powerful as a parent, right? Because these are I'm getting it now as I see my kids do sports or athletic or other kinds of things. I was good at this, and you know they're not necessarily as, let's say, good at me, but then they shine and they're outstanding in their own ways, right? In ways that I didn't, right? And so it's like, how do we honor and appreciate those elements of them in regards to like things that they like, things that drive them and motivate them, and how do we nurture those pieces, right? In regards to like even conversations of like thinking about art school, right? As a parent, like what does it mean for the students themselves to go when uh, I myself, for example, might have my own preconceptions of what art school might mean or entail and so forth. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, LT, or so forth. So to me, I think it was on the one hand like super amazing and courageous, right? To just make a trek across the country essentially, or midway across the country, have that experience, and seek your own path, right? Which I think is pretty honorable in her own way. As a 18-year-old, right? You're just like, whoa.
I see that, but trust me, I wanted to push back on a lot of what they were saying. They didn't see how much they were helped, right?
Okay.
And so a lot of it they felt like they were doing on their own. Like, oh, mom, you could only help me so far. Oh, mom was the one that put you in the private school to help you get into that art school in
Hmm.
the first place, right? This all the capital, their capital, my capital, I would argue was very invisible to them, right? I think, and I'm not. I get it. That's how privilege works, right? But for me, what was interesting is how much they could not see their own privilege, right? And so if UCLA is your standard, UCLA is your basement, like damn, like
Hmm.
like for Jabari to say, "Oh, I was over it. I was over
I was
UCLA." You got people literally like crying. Go ahead, George.
he said I like change. So I was over UCLA by the time I was 12. So I like change. and so I decided to go elsewhere. It was a level of I'm gonna say agency that
I
I
agree.
just that I just I mean it's amazing. I mean, I guess I have that level of agency as an alumni of 20 years, but I didn't have that agency at 12,
At
right?
12.
At 12. I mean, even Zoe, she's like, yeah, I went to art school, but my picture was at UCLA. They just took it down. And it kind of frustrated her, like they took my picture down. Like it was a level of like agency that I mean, it's amazing and interesting to investigate that because it is extremely privileged, but it is literally their lived experience. They do not know any better. It will be, it's kind of like my parents. Like I was raised in a house and they're like, yeah, you weren't raised in like the country like we were. And so they think that like, you live very, very well. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I had a bedroom and I didn't live my bad. And so like the kids are like, yeah, I mean not the kids, Jabari and Zoe, they are like, yes, this was and they really lean into this idea of like, I don't know what you mean by like the fact that one of the other thing that really, really hit home to me for
They were
about
like,
that.
"Hey."
Yeah, they're like, I don't understand what you mean. Um, Food insecurities,
Okay.
and it's so they talked a lot about the meal plan at UCLA
Yes.
and how they could eat whatever they wanted to,
Oof.
and they really enjoyed the ice cream experience. They were forced to eat salads every now and again, and it really spoke to because when you work with a lot of students, there are many students who like suffer from food insecurities.
I was
it,
one.
it, it, it was and as was I. you know uh I had the experience of opening up the refrigerator and there was nothing in it but
The life.
nothing, the literally some baking soda. um and so um and there are college students, many college students who suffer from food insecurities, and so to have them not even have the experience of being the hungry college student, even though they were on a college campus. The quality of food at UCLA is different than many college campuses. So it's not just that they were in or around college educated people, or that they were on a college campus a lot. They were at UCLA, which is really like an elite research one institution that is unique in that the neighborhood that is in is like $1 billion neighborhood. So like their experiences are extremely, extremely unique. And just provide them a level of privilege that it's awesome, but it's also breathtaking.
Woo! So much. And there's comments in the chat, and I'll be sure to read them out loud. So, number one, what's coming to mind for me is how often do we talk about Black students having this level of privilege? We don't, right? They are
Never.
like, and I can't even imagine what the percentage is like of Black students having this particular experience. Dimple, and I don't know how Dimple is doing this with a baby in her arms, but Dimple was able to type out a question that said, I haven't seen the video yet, but can't wait. I'm wondering how you dealt with their privilege. I'm so anxious of how second gen and middle class privilege our kids are going to be. And then related to that, Watson says, I've yet to watch the video, but I'm only 22 and the possibility of children for me seems way far off. That said, how do I circumvent the ill effects of this privilege? Very similar to or what Dimple wrote too, like well-meaning yet harmful ignorance. I can start, P and George chime in. I will say this. I'm very like what comes across in the video, I am very proud to say, is like their graciousness, their level, even if they're not aware of their privilege, I think in some ways they are aware of their privilege. Like they weren't fully aware of everything, but I think they know their experience is unique, right? So there's something that's very sort of like mannered and very polished about them. Um, that was great. So I'm glad my husband and I were able to have them get to that point. So they've never been. I know I mentioned Fresh Prince, but honestly, they are not Hillary Banks. They're not like arrogant whatsoever. But it is wild to me to see what it is that they're going through. I don't know, George, if you have anything. Oh, Erica had a comment. Go ahead.
It reminds me a little bit of there's a guy, it's a I'm a sociologist, so I'm gonna quote this dude, right? This guy, Seamus Khan, who wrote this book about privilege at a private school, like a boarding school. And he basically says that like being privileged in terms of like elite folks is like kind of almost like being seamless, like being able to navigate multiple situations without like dropping that you're privileged, right? So in other words, privileged kids can talk about pop culture, they can reference like every day, and they can also speak to like, you know, larger things that
High
might work
culture.
in elite, but higher class kind of stuff. So it's interesting. So while your kids, they're not Hillary Banks, but there is that ease. They have like an ease to them when I think when it comes to higher ed that, you know, you might not see otherwise.
I think that what you said when you said polished, it is the acknowledgement that they have an extremely unique experience and they don't assume that other people have that experience, right? So it is not like it is privileged but not unconscious, right? It is the idea that yes, my experience is my experience. I own that experience. I'm not gonna act like I didn't have that experience. But at the same time, I acknowledge that it's a very weird sort of fishbowl experience.
Mm,
Um, and so I think that level of polish, uh, that level of analysis, I think is very very dope. And you know the sort of like sort of grace, if you will, um, is something that you know as a first gen college student I do not have. But it's funny to see like my wife specifically, how it is, you know, I call it's like there's a level of cool to it, right? It's a level of like, you know, I think of things as big. This is amazing. I'm the first person to do this. I'm a trailblazer. And you know, the folks who walk down the trail are like, "Oh, this has been here all the time. What's the big deal? I don't understand. It's a nice road. I don't understand." It's like, no, you don't understand. This is amazing. I'm the first person, and they're like, yeah, and I'm the second. And that's good. I respect that you are the first, and you should respect that I'm the second, and we just gonna move on from there. So, you know, it's a level of cool that you know I probably will never attain, but I see it in my children. You know, when I was a kid, I was like, you know, you have to play basketball. You born and raised in Inglewood. You have to play basketball. You have to love sports. And my kids are like, I like piano. I don't. Sports are sports are cool. You know, sports are things that my mom and dad make me do, because it's good for my health. But like they do not draw any sort of identity or strength around their athletic prowess. They're more like I have a lot of different interests, and I'm going to explore each of them equally. And I'm like, wow, that is just a level of analysis that I just
right,
didn't have when I
right.
was there when I was their age. I wasn't. They're well rounded.
I have a specific example that comes to mind before I send this over to P. Um, Going back to Dimple and Watson's question. And P, I think you were there for this. And George, I know you were around too. So, given where we lived, they went to elementary school, still crazy to say, in Brentwood, and then middle school in Westwood, which is where UCLA is located. And that Westwood Middle School was actually predominantly Black and Latinx, so students were bused in, and very few white students in the middle school that they both attended. And I remember distinctly there was an assignment they had where they had to interview someone in their family about how they came to the United States and bring
Hmm.
documents of that immigration experience. P, you remember that?
I remember it coming up and having a conversation about that,
Yeah, so
right?
yes, I debriefed it with you
Yeah.
and others in the office. So to recap, the assignment, the middle school assignment was interview someone in your family about their immigrants experience and bring documents of it, right? So that's hella inappropriate. And so Jabari, and so they've grown up with this. They've grown up with, you know, one of my best friends is, my best friends are sociologists, right? So and so they know that they may not have the language to have like a sociological inquiry or CRT, but they know this is not right. And so what ended up happening is Jabari came to me. He is upset. He is like, Mom, this is the assignment that we had. My friend, can't remember his name. He doesn't have documents, right? This,
Mm.
he's from Guatemala. He couldn't document his experience. And so what we ended up doing is saying, you write that down. You tell the teacher what's wrong with this assignment, right? I'm gonna back you up because I'll fight for my kids. Ain't like you ain't messing with Jabari or Zoe, right? You fight, that
So
I'm gonna
first gen
back
of
you
you.
up. All first
So
gen.
first
First,
gen of
oh,
you.
I will take these earrings off and then go to your office and put them back on. And so for them, I think this is my analysis, right? I think what led to some of their confidence is knowing that I would back them up, that knowing I'm going to sit down with them and say, yes, you're absolutely right. This is not wrong. You write a letter. That's what I had him do. You write out to the teacher what you felt was wrong about this. And if I dare that teacher to say something, because, I'm coming up to the school. But P, I know we've said a lot of things, P. Anything you want to jump in about?
I did want to just take it back briefly. Y'all might think I'm a little bit nitpicking, but I did catch Jay say in the when it came down to the swipes, when he moved out, he went to college and he was staying at his old place. I think he was a little bit more conscious of how many he actually had in the account versus when he was at UCLA. It felt like it was just like, hey, anytime, any day, hot dogs, pizza, ice
I
cream.
make it rain.
Right, exactly. Whereas when I imagine at some point, you're probably still offering some degree of support, right, for Jabari even while he was in college. But all of a sudden, it's like, oh snap! You mean like there's actually numbers attached to these swipes, right? Not just like a universal, being able to. So that was one of the other things that came to me, right, when I was listening to it. It was like, oh, okay, so here's a moment of like a deeper consciousness now that you're older, right? In terms of like how all that is connected. But yeah, man, but to the point, I think one of the other things, it just to me was it's just um I think about myself having a conversation with my kids are younger, right? But they seem so reflexive, right? And also to your point, right? Just in terms of the graciousness, I put in the comments earlier about their interactions with the service workers and other folks,
Oh,
staff,
yeah.
and so all those were powerful kinds of experiences for them to have had, right? And I think that's another level going back to the degrees of privilege where I think like you might be levitating a little bit, but not in the same way that other folks are in terms of like dismissing folks who quote unquote you don't need or you don't see a value of them given their social location. So that was something that was particularly powerful for me and just hearing their ability to navigate a variety of different kinds of spaces and engaging different kinds of people from some of the student athletes to the neighbors to like hooping in the front yard to like even boundaries that you all gave them on how far they could go and those kinds of things, right? I think are all things that were kind of spinning in my mind as I was hearing those comments. I do know Erica has. I don't know if you want to jump in, Erica,
Damn,
or
Pete, that was good. I'm taking notes over here. Like you talking about their engagement with different populations, and I want to talk about their engagement with Black students in particular. So don't let me forget that. Go ahead. E.
okay.
Yeah, no, I just it's all making me really think about stuff. I was thinking about LT when you said that you encouraged them to write in that essay, right? You encouraged Jabari to kind of push back and say, hey, this is why this assignment's not working, right, for students, and why it's problematic. And I think about that, that's a level of capital, right? To be able to, know that you can like assert yourself in those spaces, which often comes about if somebody has had a higher education, right? It made me think a lot about my own experience here. Like, my dad went to college. He was a teacher. He's a phys ed teacher. So I had it just made me really reflect. I know some folks here identify as first gen. I'm not first gen. So maybe think about the levels of privilege that I've had, maybe to where my parents didn't help me out in school when I had problematic teachers, when there were things going on to push back, to assert myself in those ways. When I got to college, they helped me financially. They were able to kind of give me a little bit of a sense, but my dad went to college, failed. He actually told me what not to do, right? So he failed a semester and had to he was commuting, he was working, living at home. He was first in his family. My grandmother went back to college same time as him and got a degree. So they graduated around the same time. So this whole interesting story, but basically that's all to say that it made me really think about all those layers to it, right? Like what I learned from my parents, and also what they didn't know, because I went away to school. I had some qualitatively different experiences as well. We talked about that with the difference between fine arts school versus an institution. So my dad was at a city college, I was at a state school, right? I went away. He didn't have that experience. So anyway, it just made me really think about all of those kinds of connections too. Even if you're not first gen, the ways in which things start to be differentiated. I think Pedro talked about that with individual experiences and sort of how people play that out. Anyway,
absolutely, yeah. It didn't occur to me while we were having the conversation at the time, and it occurs to me a little bit more now. When I meant, let me actually. By the way, I just feel like this should be a mandatory viewing for a lot of folks interested in privilege, first gen studies, and all that, and Black students as well. But I mentioned the length of the duration of time. I actually didn't talk about the context in which we were living on campus. So we would have moved on 2005 or something like that, 2001, 2004. During that period of time, UCLA had admitted the lowest number of Black students in decades. And there was a freshman class in particular that started in 2006, known as the infamous 96, where there were literally only 96 Black freshmen out of a class of 6,000. So at this point, we are 2 years into living on campus. So we've got our footing on campus. And I remember at one point, yeah, Watson, you want to say something right now? I didn't even get it out.
His mouth dropped. Welcome to UCLA, baby.
Did you have a question, Watson?
It's so strange. I didn't even really raise my hand, but I think the computer responded to me.
I was like, what the hell?
Nothing at all.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely wild.
Okay, hang on. So hang on. So I remember at one point, this is not in the video, but we were just talking and about I think I was just asking Jay and Z or Jabari oh, the students have reactions to you, and he was like, I just think it must have been weird to see little kids on campus. And I was like, son, you just don't know. You probably aided in their retention, to be honest. And I think that is a word, and I know Erica's actually done study on that population. What do I mean by that? I think for many of these students, seeing a family and seeing a Black family with little kids that's reminding them of their little brothers and sisters and their cousins or the kids in their neighborhood was probably something that helped make them feel better. Because when I say we were living there, we weren't, just to explain, our apartments weren't necessarily in the hallways with the students. We were in the building, but had our own separate entrances. But nevertheless, students, because my kids are scootering around and playing basketball, people saw them all the time. And Erica, Pedro, I think, and George, I think that's I think it's really should be factored into the way we think about that infamous 96.
Yeah. One of the things that I guess we haven't really, it's like the elephant in the room that we haven't really discussed, is how sort of hostile the experience for Black students was at UCLA. and because of the low numbers and because of the fact that we were the first campus that ended Prop 209, and we had a bunch of professors on campus who were frankly not very excited about the handful of Black students who were there. Without just to contextualize, I'm like, Ben Shapiro went to UCLA. Like it was not the most uh, welcoming experience. It was extremely isolating, and the handful of us who were successful, we had to create we had to create a family in order to survive. And we had to take ideas like agency and make them powerful, some tools that we could use. So what do I mean by that? When I thought of agency, particularly agency of Black students on campus, first gen and Black students on campus, is the idea that, like, you do not have to uh, uh, dim your light. This is your campus. This is your library. You don't have to justify your experience there. And so when I think of agency in education for first gen students, I think of it as a sort of an empowering sort of experience. But it's funny to consider it as a privilege, right? And that's something that's really interesting because I had never really considered it and really thought through it as a type and a form of privilege. But it absolutely is, to be able to say, and not just say and not just believe, but actually it be true that you have um, a voice and a valuable voice on a campus like UCLA, and that your experiences are not to be marginalized, but something that be the central focus. It's interesting to really sort of to consider to really consider and investigate that, because like I said, it was for we handful of Black students that was on campus, it was something that we use as like a tool of empowerment. um so yeah.
Were you saying something else too? I think you might be on mute. Oh,
I was, but Chris Chen has raised her hand.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick about this. I know this is a conversation really centering on the experiences of your kids. But I would be remiss to say that at least from my perspective, right? LT, seeing you with your kids and integrating them so much
Hmm.
into like our lives, GMP, just in all the spaces you went, it made a huge impact, I think, for somebody who was in academia to think, could I even have a family? And what does that look like? And how do you balance that? So it made like a huge difference on my end to see that how you did it and how you navigated those spaces and how you brought your family into that was really moving and really inspiring. And I draw a lot from that still.
Aw.
So I thank you for showing like so many of us that it could be done in ways that's just really meaningful. And then to hear your children talk about it, it's just wonderful. So thank you for sharing all that and just really
Mm.
making yourselves really vulnerable and just so I don't know. I took so much from seeing that as a grad student. So thank you for that. And I hope to
Aw.
be able to do similar things with my children. I think you just hear so many horror stories in higher education where the advice is like you don't want to share any of that private life. Like you don't even somebody gave me the advice of don't show pictures of your kids at your office because it makes it seem like, they're not like, that they're too much of a priority. And that's just like, oh, that's terrible. So I'm so glad that I was able to see. I was so glad to be able to see a very different side. So thank you for that.
and I'll add on that, LT. I'll say that as given the topic of first gen conversations, I think I'll give two quick examples. It's just the beauty of boundary drawing, right? I think for me, I think what was helpful to see, and I remember one of a couple of times that I went, we were at your place, LT. I don't know if it was for like just like a hangout or some kind of just event out of the
A
several of them, right?
kickback.
A kickback.
And there you go. And we were there, right? And it was, it was going on, whatever the flyer must have said, X time to like 8 or 9 p.m. It was at like 9:15 or something like that. And I remember you were like, all right, guys, it's time to, time to essentially get it moving, right? And it was such a powerful thing for me to hear, right? That on the one hand, you can have folks over, and also you don't have to sit there and wait till like whatever time somebody feels like they have to leave, that then they have. It was like, and I remember asking you later on, and you were like, well, you know what, my kids got to go to sleep. I have this and I have that, and for me, I like, I just remember growing up in a context where it was so much like, well, when guests come over, like, you have them there till it's like whatever the time they leave, right? And I think that was a powerful experience and a beautiful learning moment. And then for me, just uh, working at GMP serving students. And I remember at one point in time, LT, you pulled me aside. I'm not going to say how long I had taken for my dissertation, right? But you were at some point saying, look, Pete, you can be like the greatest GMP advisor ever, or you can finish your dissertation, right? And I think right now is a wonderful time for you to really focus on finishing your dissertation, and it was something along the lines of like, look, if you spend 20 minutes or 30 minutes with them, like at some point in time, whatever additional time you spend past that, it is not changing like the fundamental equation of what you were doing in those first 20, 30 minutes, right? And so those kinds of like boundary drawings and like to the larger point of being on campus and being off campus, but also having a compass for folks, I think was a particularly powerful and transformative experience for me, and to Chris and Erica's point and other folks' point about seeing you all there on campus, I think I think it's powerful, in so many different ways for so many different people that I think, you actually don't know or understand it till you actually have something like this and have folks share it back to you.
Woo. Yes, thank you for being here, Watson. This is why I said this should be mandatory viewing, because there's so many implications here, and like we're really just getting into it. Because Chris, thank you for your comments, but that is a fair question to ask. Well, before, how did these kids even get here, right? What was that like? And although I was faculty in residence, I was in ladder faculty, so that's one thing. And thank you, Angela, for reminding me that when we started, there were only 2 Black FIRs at the time, and I was recruited to join the program from another Black faculty in residence. So shout out to Kelly Lido Hernandez, who invited me to participate. By the time, what up, Ange? By the time we moved off, there were more Black faculty, more Black FIRs on campus. Um, so I really didn't I had such a great working environment that many of you all were a part of, that I didn't necessarily feel isolated or anything like that. I got to go work in a space that was, primarily people of color, right? So for me it was sort of kind of like everywhere all the time. So I didn't have I I I didn't feel like the affirmative action faculty and resident or anything like that. It was actually it was an overall really great experience. Thanks to Angela Coloretti, who told me, LT, you would be a great faculty and resident. And like the first thing that came to mind was Animal House. I was like, what? And mind you, some crazy shit did happen. But the crazy shit that happened while we lived on campus mostly were visiting students, not UCLA students. They were like the worst were summer kids. The summer camp kids, those are the privileged kids. Those are the kids who would like steal the stop sign and, do some nonsense. The UCLA kids, incredibly polite and respectful. Like we had no issues with actually no behavior issues or anything like that with the actual residents.
I also want to tell I'm sorry, another story. And I guess it kind of goes to the experiences of Zoe and Jabari, and um I guess I'll call it privilege, but it's really just like their experiences. So like I remember the Miles family, the Reese Miles family really likes to compete at board games. We're a board game family. And so if you go over there, you're gonna be in a board game battle. It's gonna happen, right? And so, I remember a particular game of Taboo that we were playing.
Okay.
And what I remember is, we all know a lot of words, and we know each other. But I remember Zoe and Jabari being on the same team and kicking our tails.
Mm.
I'm talking about, it was bad. It was like yellow, Austria. Where did you get Austria from yellow? And the idea was that, they spent so much time together, they literally could finish each other's sentences. But it was interesting that you had these, and at the time they were kids, and they were wiping the floor with a bunch of like
Grad
graduate
students and professional school students.
professional school. I'm talking about wiping the floor. Like, how are you beating us so badly? And so, you know, when you are first gen, right, you kind of lead with, to some extent, or to demonstrate that that you belong. You're like, oh, but I'm in school and I'm educated, and I've read this book and I've taken this class and I know what you're talking about. And it's funny to be amongst people who hadn't read the book and didn't take that class, and like, and we belong here too. And so they always had like a very strong sense of self and a strong sense of belonging that translates kind of everywhere they go, right? It's like, it's kind of take it or leave it. I am who I am, and that sort of strong sense of self is one of the things that I used as a sense of strength going into college, and it's one of the things that I wanted to pass on to my kids, but I worried about it because I got that strong sense of self out of like a lot of trauma and lack. and I was like, well, my kids won't have that problem. Will they still have it? Will they still have that strong sense of self? And that's why I think that Zoe and Jabari are so cool, because they didn't have that like trauma, scarcity, sort of, I don't know if we can make it, I gotta pull myself up sort of attitude. And yet they still have a very strong sense of self and a very strong like sort of agency in where they stand. So it gives us hope. It gives us hope.
That was beautiful and so well said. I just want to say, actually, Dimple, don't go just yet, because it actually was something I was gonna tee up, which is about what happened after they went to college, right? And I'll start with myself. I remember being in my McNair Scholars Program. One of the things we had to do was write down everybody we knew that had a PhD. I'm like, that's not your professor, right? And I'm like someone in the wild? Like, how was I supposed to know someone that had a doctorate? Like, that was my mentality. So no,
Dr.
Jabari,
J.
for the record, Dr. J. I should have put Dr. J. For the record, for those who don't know, Jabari did not go to UCLA. He went to Cal State Northridge. Jabari knew three people out the back who are faculty members at CSUN waiting for him. Two are basically aunties for him. So Auntie Dimple and Auntie Tracy already, they're like, oh, we're right here. Jay, if you need anything, let us know. And even if he doesn't hang out with them, he knows they're there, right? He's like, oh, they've been in my house. I've been at their house. And
The
these are
minute that he
faculty.
stepped foot on campus, I know three. I know three
I know
people.
three.
I got a three and a possible.
So just, having that type of experience. So thank you for that, Dimple. I know you gotta run.
No, thank you. I remember meeting Jabari at a cafe on campus, and poor guy, it was like, I gotta meet my auntie. I gotta talk to one of my aunts. Like, I'll meet you all later. And I'm like, so do you have a job yet? Like, tell me about your classes. Like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? And Jabari was like, like, I'm forced to do this right now. Like, it was amazing. It was
The
great.
privilege to be like, oh man, I gotta go meet my auntie who's a professor. I'm gonna end with a mic drop. Trust me, it has to do with Zoe. But anything else before P or anybody else. I know we started a little late. We're getting over time, but
That is hilarious. So I gotta go meet with my aunt about
I know.
school stuff. Oh.
well, I know people. I'll share the mic drop moment because everybody doesn't know this. And thank you all for being here today. But let me tell you this story real quick. And again, I hope some master student who's looking for a topic lands on this video and decides to write about it. But when Zoe was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, she called me up one day. She was like, "Mom, have you ever written about feminism?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I got a journal article, yeah, about feminism. Why?" Because she's taking this Black feminist theory class, and she was like, "Oh, well, we have to read an article written by a Black feminist, so I'm going to read one of your articles and present on it in class." Y'all, that is mind blowing to me, right? And she was like, I mean, just imagine that. Like I'm presenting today and I'm presenting my mother's work.
I know her. That's my folks right there.
Exactly. And so I tell one of my other best friends, Sam Pinto, professor at UT Austin, about this, and she was like, "Oh, I know who's teaching Zoe's class. So tell Zoe to tell Rebecca, wherever it is, that I'm her auntie. That her auntie, Zoe's auntie, is Sam Pinto, right? That's just that. Let me just call my mom up, right? Exactly. So I think there's so much more to be said. P, I'll send this over to you. But I just think there's so much more to be dug up and said about this like fascinating, really, really unique experience that these two individuals had. But P, close us out.
Well, geez, kind of hard to follow that, LT. I'll just simply say, as I hear you and I listen to you, I think one of the key pieces is that I do hope other folks tap into this. That these would be powerful kind of master's, doctoral level thesis type of research questions, and get this worked out because it's necessary, especially in the context of humanizing folks all across the kind of pipeline of experiences, and just bringing folks together like we did today. I think on top of all that, I think is beautiful, and fold us in, LT, for more of these conversations, so that we can continue to explore, because there's so many different cuts that we can take across these topics, and I'm sure others more to come. So I look forward to just staying kind of connected and keeping the dialogue going on multiple levels. So thank you for sharing this space with us, LT, for inviting us, and for always, right, just bringing folks together to talk about, to dream, to imagine, to celebrate, right? I think it brings us a lot of joy in the process. And so, yes, this is a first gen legacy conversation, but it's also OG GMP brown bag session. So we'll leave it at that.
GMP forever, y'all.
That's right.
Forever.
Thank you
Yep.
all so much. Again, I'm sharing the recording out to everyone who registered. Thanks for spending part of your Sunday here today.
Have a good one, y'all.
Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you, brothers. That was
Thank
awesome.
you.
Oh, hold on. Let me stop the recording.